Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Today we're going to talk about CYA. Okay, so when I was in school a long time ago, 16 years ago, that's what they preached to us every single class. Every class, the beginning of class, in the middle, the end, all 10 classes, every single time, CYA. So what that stands for is cover your butt. All right, so remember, when you get a vehicle and you look at it, you inspect it, whether it be a drivability with a complaint, a check engine light, a leak of any sort of noise, driving issue, no matter what it is that you have, you need to cover yourself and the shop. What that means is that whatever you write down, whatever you put in your notes is very important. So when you get that vehicle, it all starts with you scan it for the code, and there's no code, or there is code, there's no freeze frame data. You go drive it, you don't hear the noise. You've run it under whatever conditions that you've been told. Maybe you've been told nothing. Maybe you've been told something. So you try to duplicate it under heavy load on the freeway. I have a coolant leak. It runs rough first thing in the morning. And so basically what it's going to start with is it's going to start with your first part of your diagnosis. Did you confirm the complaint? So your notes are going to say, let's say you have a check engine light. You scan it for the codes. Well, first thing when it comes in, was the light on or off? Okay, well, that's going to be the first part of your notes. Check engine light not on upon arrival. Scan for codes, found X amount of codes. Here's the freeze frame. Found the freeze frame for this code, or scanned it for codes and there were no codes. You drove it. You didn't hear the noise. So your notes need to reflect whether you did confirm or did not confirm the complaint. Now, that is really important because if you didn't confirm the complaint and you attempted to duplicate it, you're going to maybe in your notes, you're going to say, need more information. Please verify with the customer under what conditions this concern happens, or whatever the case may be, that's going to help you figure out what it is, whether they need to come down, take you for a ride. Let's say you have a noise complaint and you have multiple noises. Well, a long time ago, I had an Escort that came in for one noise, and I fixed that noise. That noise was, I think, the timing belt rubbing on the cover or something. I think that's what it was the most prevalent noise that I heard. Well, then the customer said, oh, that wasn't the noise I was concerned about. Okay, so there was a bad axle. Okay, well, I was new, and this was a long time ago, so I had a lack of knowledge as far as how you should write things up. And so we did an axle, and that turned out to not be their complaint either. It turned out their complaint was knocking on acceleration. So it was I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. I can't remember, but whenever you would go to accelerate under heavy load, it would knock really bad. And so, we had to look further, and, we figured out that problem, but that kind of puts you in a pickle, because then they can, they're trying to say, well, you didn't fix my noise. I know my timing belt was making noise. I agree, but I didn't, that wasn't my complaint. And well, yeah, my axle's bad, but I wasn't complaining about that either. So in turn, I mean, they can really kind of decline in those repairs, and you kind of are stuck. So if you're saying that you didn't confirm it, let's say you have a vehicle that intermittently stalls, and you get into it, it's got no codes, there's nothing prevalent, you've checked everything as far as, maybe Identifix, maybe you even Google searched it, you did all your due diligence, and you can't find anything, about it. And let's say you get in and you realize that, here's an example. We had a a car that came in for an intermittent stall, and you know, the guy kept messing with it and messing with it and messing with it, couldn't figure it out, and I got in it and tried to turn the key and nothing would happen. And he's, oh, you got to hold the key a certain way to start it. So, well, I had a bad ignition switch. Well, a bad ignition switch can cause stalling. We never duplicated the stalling. And so the notes at that point are going to specify did not duplicate stalling. However, the ignition switch has failed, and obviously it failed. The customer knew that there was a problem, and this can cause stalling, but we're not saying it's going to fix the problem, but we need to fix this first as a first step, because this is a cause of stalling. And it turned out to not be the cause. However, it was a justifiable repair. Now, if we had said that we caused the stalling, and oh, we found that the ignition switch was losing signal, and then then it still stalled. Okay, well, now we're eating it. But it's all in how you write it up. So I've had this happen a couple times. I had this happen on a Duramax and a Beetle just now, where you get a vehicle and it comes in with a coolant leak, and you pressure test it and you find a coolant leak. Well, coolant leaks are going to be one of those things to where the system's either sealed or it's not. Okay. Well, as soon as you fix one leak and you pressurize it, if there's any other weak points in the system, now you've fixed the one point, so now it has full pressure, so now it's going to push past the next point, or maybe there was a small seepage in a bunch of areas, and as soon as you fix one leak, the next one leaks, the next one leaks, the next one leaks. So I had a Duramax came in, and it had a coolant hose that had a split in it, like it literally would just run coolant. I'd run out of it without pressurizing it. And fixed those issues, and then had another issue, and ended up having to pull the transmission, and and then fix that, and there was another issue, and then then it turned out it had head gaskets leaking. So it's all in how you write it up. I have a Volkswagen right now that started off as a coolant leak. Now this is why it's important to cover yourself. CYA is, I have this Volkswagen and it had a leaking thermostat housing, and it had a code for the thermostat as well. And I noticed that all the hoses all over the car had orange crusties all over the ends. Well, that means that there's a seepage there. But I also noticed that there was a leak somewhere else, a possible leak, and I needed to tear it down to inspect. And I told my notes specified this part over here is bad, the thermostat housing. However, need X amount of time to go and further test the system for other leaks, and that part wasn't sold, so we did the thermostat housing, and turned out that it had other things on the car were leaking, and then now it's a complete disaster, because now basically every single hose on the vehicle is leaking, and I'm pulling it all apart, and I've got every hose on the floor. And then I look at the water outlet, which is on the back of the head, and the water outlet is eating through where I thought there was some lubricant on there, and I tried to wipe it away, and there was nothing there. It was eating away, and so we had to pull the water outlet off. And so the reason that I'm bringing this up is because in the end, regardless of how they handle it with the customer, regardless of how the customer pays for it, that's not on you. You're the technician. What matters to you is, did you do your job right? The vehicle came in for a coolant leak. Did you do your job right? If you said water outlet leaking, thermostat housing leaking, replace thermostat housing, and you didn't say anything about the other leaks, or maybe whether you noticed them or not, even if you noticed them and you didn't document it, you didn't recommend more time, you didn't say you could have additional problems, well, then it looks like you didn't do your job. Now, if let's say you did recommend it and they didn't sell it, well, then when it comes down to it and they're looking at whether you did your job or not, look back at the notes and say, oh, well, you recommended further inspection, and that part wasn't sold, it was overlooked, whatever. Maybe the customer declined it, it didn't matter. But at that point, when they go back and look at the notes say that you did your job correctly. And that's the important part, is how well did you do your job? How well did you cover yourself? Coolant is a really good thing to bring up, because when you have a coolant problem, a lot of times, sometimes you replace the coolant leak and everything is fine, right? But then I've had a string of these lately where you fix one coolant problem and then there's another one, and then there's another one and another one, and sometimes the car doesn't even leave. In this case, I had to take off the whole bumper assembly, had to pull the front carrier into service position, and pull the intake manifold off just to even see the thermostat housing. And then I put the intake back on, put put the carrier back into position and pressure tested it because I knew there was that possibility. And sure enough, there was another leak. So then I had to go and pull the carrier back, disconnect the radiator hoses, pull the carrier back, pull the intake back off. Then I had to put the carrier back on, back into regular mode, connect the radiator hoses, fill it full of water, and pressure test it to start looking at all the leaks. And then I started finding more and more leaks. And then as I got into this, as I left it pressurized for a while, leaks were starting to form all over the place. So as I started looking at all these crusty connections that were crusty before, well, now they're wet. And so now they're really starting to leak. And now the crazy thing about this vehicle is you wonder, okay, so why are these things all of a sudden leaking? And they weren't leaking before. And, you know, they weren't leaking that bad before. Well, it had a bad thermostat. So when a thermostat fails, most of the time it fails open. So the vehicle doesn't get to operating temperature. If it doesn't get to operating temperature, it doesn't have the full pressure. The full pressure is what causes leaks. When I pressurize it to 16 pounds, that's full pressure. Well, that's, you know, I mean, I'm just random numbers here. That's, you know, 220 degrees coolant temp. Well, if your thermostat's not open, you're not hitting 220, you're not getting the pressure, so therefore all those leaks aren't going to be that bad. It's just going to be the one main leak. And then as soon as you pressurize it, bam, now you start having all these problems. So these are things that you have to think about, and these are answers that you have to have when somebody says, well, why didn't all these things leak before? I mean, that answer doesn't always matter, because it's not always a thermostat problem. Maybe it's just because you disturbed it. Disturbing things. When I was really new into the industry, I had a Toyota pickup, I think, came in for, I don't remember, I think an oil change or something, and the transmission fluid was really dirty. For whatever reason, we dropped the pan, dropped the filter, dropped the gasket, and the transmission worked fine before. Then we put a new filter, new gasket, new fluid, and now all of a sudden it lost overdrive. Well, overdrive was working before, why didn't it work? Why isn't it working now? You would think, new fluid, whatever. Well, a lot of times when you disturb a system, coolant and transmission fluid are really big for this. When you disturb a system, then things change. Air gets in there, whatever, and things stop working. Transmissions lose gears. They slip after you replace the fluid. It's just something that happens. So keep that in mind when you're recommending stuff when you do jobs. And also with coolant, make sure that you're checking this stuff, because these things happen. And I mean, you know what? Just go and report your findings. And at that point, whether the shop eats it, whether the customer declines it and says they just want it put back together, doesn't matter. You did your job. Remember, you are the technician. Service writer gets the car, they talk to the customer, they give you the work order and the notes. You take it and you run with it. However, if you have no information, then you need to make sure you give whatever information is based on the situation. And that situation involves communication and notation. Very, very important. CYA always. Always put it in your notes. Don't ever assume, don't ever just tell somebody something. You can tell somebody something, but make sure it's in your notes, because in the end, if you didn't put it in your notes, it didn't happen. That's how this industry works. You have to put it in your notes. You have to put it in your parts request. That's very important. And so with that said, make sure that you check this out. Make sure you are doing your due diligence to give the proper diagnosis, whether it be I just need more time or I didn't duplicate it. And I mean, there's just nothing happening and we need to drive it more. The customer needs to come and take us for a ride. So that's what you need to do to be strong in this industry and to go far. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Check out my Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone at Instagram. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell. You get notified of all of my future content. And also leave me a comment down below about how this applies to you, whether you liked it, whether this has happened to you. Maybe you got screwed because you didn't put it in your notes and you just told somebody, because that has happened to me. That's why I'm making this video, because I have definitely had that happen to me. So thanks for checking me out. I'll see you next time.